Hey everybody, good morning and welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast. My name is Clayton. I'm the lead pastor here at Trinity New Life Church. What we do on Beyond Sunday is we take your faith beyond Sunday, because that's what the title is, into your everyday life. I know. Well, we got to work on it. And so that's actually going to be the whole series that we got coming up.
Beyond Sunday.
It's not called Beyond Sunday.
Yeah, but it's the purpose of
Yes,
this
going Beyond
series.
Sunday with
Yes.
Beyond Sunday. That'd be too much of an Inception level thing.
That really is going to be very meta in the idea of Beyond Sunday with Beyond Sunday.
Right. Well, that's why we're not going to call it Beyond Sunday.
Anyways.
As great as this opening
Finish your
has been,
opening there.
If you'd like to interact with us on this podcast, send us questions that have to do with the sermons, have to do with the series, or have to do with anything having to do with your Christian faith and how do you live that out, please email us at podcast@trinitynewlife.com. You can always interact and follow us at Trinity New Life on Instagram. And I'm here with Executive Director Chell Branda. Hi, Chell.
Hey.
Did you have your first discipleship group this morning?
I did have my very first discipleship group this morning.
Of the semester.
Of this semester, yes.
Of
It's
the
not the
semester.
very first discipleship group I've ever had. That was years and years ago. But it was the first one of this semester, kicking off groups this week. So I am wide awake. I've already finished. I don't have coffee with me on the podcast today, which is weird.
Right,
if you watch us on YouTube, I always have coffee with me normally. But I finished the coffee this morning, and I was like, probably shouldn't go for the second cup of espresso quite yet. Let's get into the day.
Well, today is your day to work on finances and numbers. And
Well,
so
trust me, there'll be 7 or 8 by the end of the day.
that and a speedball.
Yep.
Okay, so what we're going to try to do on the podcast today is we want to talk a little bit about this past weekend with Pastor Jim Critcher. So we're going to go a little bit through his message, and we're going to go a little bit through the night of encouragement, talk about what it's like when we have a guest come in, when we have Pastor Jim come in. So a couple years ago, we added Pastor Jim to the elder board of TNLC.
A couple years ago?
A couple years ago. It was 6 now, I guess, 6 or 7.
I was going to say, he's been an elder the entire time I've been around.
Okay.
So that's 7 years.
Yeah, we did not. We were talking a little bit at lunch, Pastor Jim and I, on Sunday about, just as a reminder of how that came to be, we were at the 2009 or 2010, I cannot remember, one of the yearly Every Nation conferences. They're really yearly, they're not monthly. And I mean, I knew who he was. And then there's another senior prophetic leader in Every Nation, Jim LaFoon, who everybody knows Pastor Jim. I don't know how he keeps the number of names in his head that he does.
LaFoon or Critcher?
LaFoon.
Okay, yeah.
LaFoon. I don't know.
Papa Jim.
Yes, I don't know how he does it. And we were literally getting
Chael.
off.
That's he always says that. Very heavy on the CH.
Chael.
When he says my name.
All right.
Yes.
Brother, how's Tampa doing? Okay, all right.
Yes.
And LaFoon just kind of looked at the two of us as we were starting to plant the church, and he goes, you need to get to know him. Like Critcher was saying it to me, like, you need to get to know him. And that started our relationship. He came in. We were certainly at the school, so it was over a year. So it had to be in 2010 that this was taking place. And we got to know each other. He came in. It was a real great relationship. He was able to do some, prophetic encouragement ministry, preached on Sunday. And I think the unique thing about Pastor Jim is he grew up, he's a musician, and was leading worship at the church where Pastor Jim LaFoon pastored, took over that, and then eventually became an associate. When Pastor Jim left, he took over as a senior pastor of this church in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And then while he was the senior pastor of that church, Pastor Brett Fuller in Chantilly, Virginia, who oversees Grace Covenant Church, asked him to come on and kind of be a prophetic minister to their staff and to kind of, to their church. And they were moving through executive and administrative people pretty quickly. He asked Pastor Jim to take on the role. Pastor Jim didn't think he was fit for it because, the prophetic music people, that's a little more...
Right.
Creative brain.
Yes, right brain.
I don't know which side of the brain that is.
That's the right brain.
Creative brain. The executive side, you tend to not get people to have, that's a lot of details, strategy, admin, meetings, budgets, numbers, all that stuff.
Yes.
And you tend to not have people who can flow in both of those worlds and, or have deep theology. And even meeting him, that was like the first time, like I remember taking it back to the airport, I was like, oh, we're having a good, like same kind of theological bents. I, for as much as strategy and admin and all that kind of stuff, like I would also fancy myself a creative, not a musician, but a creative.
Definitely a creative, yeah.
And there was just a really great synergy there. And then we had two other people on our elder board at the time, and then added Pastor Jim at the same time. Casey Sheffield became an elder at the church. So that was the same time, so that we went from 3 to 5, so that if we ever had to vote on something, there'd be a tie-breaking vote. We've never voted on anything. We've just always been in agreement.
Everybody just agrees.
Right,
It's been very easy and nice.
We have yet to have any kind of voting contentious item at that point. And then that's developed that relationship. And I think, again, that fits with who I am in terms of having both the administrative, the strategic, creative, some even leaning of the prophetic side. And it's amazing how I don't know if that's allowed the permission for people to kind of be in both of those worlds, that you wouldn't see it. But you've got Donnie Fisher in Aletheia, Boston, who is the executive pastor there, who also would be a very strong prophetic minister. AJ, I don't know AJ's last name.
Mosley.
AJ Mosley at Duck Church. That stands for Divine Unity Community Church. That doesn't like
not DUCK.
AJ is probably one of the strongest up and coming prophetic ministers in every nation, and is also an incredible executive pastor for Chris Johnson there. But then that's also the space that you fit into. Of an executive who's got to deal with a lot of strategy and admin. That comes a little more naturally. Numbers not so much, but the strategy and the administration side. Yeah, you're like, look, I'm working out or I'm doing numbers, but I cannot take both pain elements in my life. And so it's just really interesting to see that. And
it's
I
funny,
think,
now that you mention it, I don't run on Tuesdays. That's the funny part. Anyways, go on.
I feel like that would be the day you need to run the most. Maybe you need to run the hardest on Wednesdays.
Yes, actually.
Okay, there
go
we
on.
go. So I think, but that, so all of that, that's a long story in case just even to give, some TNLC folks some backstory of how all that came to be.
Yeah, but they want the backstory. Because I was asked a lot of these questions this morning in that deception of just this idea of explain to us. So Pastor Jim's an elder. Explain to us how that kind of happened, when that happened, and it was a lot of, honestly, before my time. So I didn't have a lot of. Okay, so
just to even give it a little more background then, so make sure your discipleship listens to this and doubles our listener view. Okay.
Listen, so, Erica and Mariah told me they're our number one fans, so let's go.
Is Griselle in your discipleship?
She is.
She's a big podcaster, I'm sure. So when I put together the board, I initially had myself, I'm the pastor president, and then Adrian Crawford, who was a peer, and then Casey Hinton. If you want to be an elder at TNLC, change your name to Casey. There's a 40% chance.
And you bump your percentage chance if your name starts with a C. Is the other
it's pretty high.
Because
or Critcher even.
Because Adrian Crawford is
it's
not
Christopher
Adrian Crawford. So.
Right. And Casey Hinton had been an elder at the church in Tallahassee, and then when we added Casey Sheffield and added Jim Critcher, to me, I looked at it like a basketball team where you don't want to just simply acquire talent, but you want that talent to be able to play well together. So Adrian is a peer and a fellow church planter who would understand a lot of what I'm going through. Casey is a local and has a perspective that the other elders don't. Casey Hinton comes from more of a counseling care background and is always asking a lot more questions about who I am and how I'm doing. Not that the other guys don't, but he knows that's kind of the role he plays. And then Jim Critcher is older than everybody else on the board and has had more church experience than everybody else on the board. Like, I don't know, this was primarily in the staff meeting that he said this, but when he came to Grace Covenant Church, they had been 500 people for 25 years.
Right.
And some of the alignments and arrangements that he was putting into place, along with just an expansion and kind of the season of time that God had them in, over the next 5 years, they went from 500 to 3,000.
Right.
And so there's an experience of here's how you build a staff, here's how you release people to do this, here's how you, all this stuff that we don't have that he is able to kind of offer, even in the like, tell me how your retirement is set up. I was like, well, I'm going to work really hard and then I'm going to retire. He's like, on what money? And I was like, that's a great question. So that's even how we've put together the elder board and how we think about it. That doesn't mean that elder board's ever going to, never going to change, but that's the kind of reason why we have it the way that we have it.
Right.
So what I was, did you have more from your discipleship group?
No, that
I was going to lead into a perspective.
You can
shift.
lead into perspective. I was just like, it was just a passing question today about that idea of, and I realized that when we when we promoted this, we said one of our elders, Pastor Jim, but for people who are newer to TNLC or people who haven't been around as long are like, oh, right, we have non-local elders. Who are those non-local elders, and why did we choose to have non-local elders, or why did we choose these men as our non-local elders?
Yep.
And that was just, I think it's great backstory. So I think people like that kind of thing.
But
so,
I think, okay, so I was just saying about how you get somebody who seems to be firing right brain, left brain.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think that does is when you see somebody else, it's hard to be the first. It's hard to go, I don't think I fit into a category. But when you can see somebody else who fits into a different kind of category, I think it gives you permission to be yourself a little bit more. And so I think one of the things that's helpful about having somebody like Pastor Jim come in, not just a guest speaker. A guest speaker is great because it gives you a different perspective. Are they going to be better than me at preaching? Probably not. But no. That's for Hannah and Michael.
There you go.
For this past weekend. But what it does is it gives you a different perspective and a different way to hear things. There was one time when Adrian Crawford came in and preached years ago, 2 weeks after I preached on the same passage, he preached on the same thing. He's like, oh man, is it going to be an overlap? And I was like, no.
Right.
We're going to talk about this in completely different ways. There's even a messages coming up where Mason and I will use the same passages as our foundation, but for very different reasons and the perspectives that we talk on it. But even if, like, that would be an interesting series is everybody talks in the same verse, but they do it
differently.
Same passage, and what do they pull out
Translations.
of it?
There you go.
That would be.
Oh, that's a good one. We should write that down.
Translations.
Later.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
Okay.
That'd be an interesting engage, at least. You could do that for an engage.
You could do that for engage, short 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Everybody's going to preach on this. What did you get from it? Nobody talked to each other.
Yep.
That'd be interesting.
Anyways.
Okay.
Brainstorm.
Stay tuned.
Welcome to that.
But I think when Pastor Jim comes in, somebody who, and if you're listening to this, you've heard him preach, you know who he is, that he travels the world now. He is no longer the executive pastor at Grace Covenant. He is, I don't know, there's like when you found the church and you retire or move on, you're like the pastor emeritus. Is that how you say the word emeritus?
Yeah, emeritus.
You know the word.
Yeah, emeritus. Is it itis? I'd have to look at it again.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, you're just kind of like, I don't run anything, but I founded this.
I think he has the title.
You still think he has the title?
Senior associate.
Okay, so
pastor.
Senior associate pastor, but he now travels the world and spends almost so much of their time investing in both Every Nation and in the church plants that they and other churches have planted. That it gives you, so you have somebody who sees a lot of the body of Christ, or at least sees a lot of the Every Nation world, and is able to come in and he preaches that message. He'll tend to get a word for the year, but then he goes into different places where it fits, speaks it and adjusts it for that crowd. And he's come for so many years now that he is able to really be comfortable.
Right.
Really be comfortable with our people. And even if he doesn't remember everybody's name, he kind of knows the faces, he knows the view of it.
Yeah.
And so I think it helps people to just step back and shift and give them permission to examine their perspective. I think it gives you permission to, wait, I haven't thought about it like that. I don't know that, again, one of the great things, anytime you have somebody who comes in with a prophetic bent, you are definitely going to get the Old Testament. You're going to be lucky to get it. I don't know that
living in the Old Testament.
Most prophetic ministers, I don't know that they know that we have a new covenant. It's there's
true.
A lot of really good stuff after Malachi.
But to be fair, there are a lot of gospel preachers who do not understand that there is an Old Testament either. So
fair point. Very fair point. Because you have to do more work if you preach the Old Testament.
This is true.
You can get up and just read a new passage from the New Testament and be like, see, you just got to do what Paul says right there. It's bad. Or see, Jesus said it right there. So I think that, to me, the theme of the weekend is the meta kind of theme of the weekend between Sunday morning and Sunday night is it gives you permission to re-examine your perspectives, re-examine the way that you're hearing things, re-examine or to bring up things that you may have forgotten about and to think about. I think that, to me, is the biggest kind of meta theme of the weekend is look at things in a different way than you have been looking at them.
I think that this is one of the treasures of Pastor Jim is this idea of when he brings these messages kind of like for the year that he really feels God is calling the church to or through, or these types of things, to sit there and,
Right.
and listen to it and go, I think that there's some encouragement, because I think that everybody heard something different in Pastor Jim's message and was able to be like, that applies to me because of this or in this way. And to have peace about, okay, now that we've heard this, and as you go through, peace to understand, oh, this explains these things. And from the bigger picture of, one of the things that TNLC just as a whole will talk about a lot, specifically with our leadership, we talk a lot about pattern recognition. And a lot of times sometimes we hear these messages and we're like, this helps unlock the patterns that you've been seeing or experiencing. So he'll say things like being out of season or bearing fruit out of season. And you're like, I was just thinking the other day that this is not the right time for this to be happening. Why is this happening right now? And then you hear Pastor Jim say something like that, and you're like, oh, this makes sense. Like there is a perspective shift that absolutely I think happens when you come to these messages. And I crave these messages to be able to take the notes, to be able to look at it, to be able to go, okay, God, show me now. Now I can sit back with the message. I can sit back with my notes and go, okay, God, open this up for me specifically. Open this up for TNLC specifically. Right. Where is this at? And there were several portions of the message that just were a great perspective reminder. There were lots of just reminders of perspectives of like, oh yes, I need to think this way. I need to push into this way. But there was such a great challenge in some of these things. This reminder of, there is hope for the young. There is, I think that was an amazing refreshment for the old. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is hard for me to say it, and it be Tim Keller calls it like a sharp truth. Like when your truth is just the bones, and you don't have like the flesh and the skin around it to kind of soften it and make it feel real and alive. And I think that that's a truth that really needs to be heard. I think that we continually, the more we talk about generations, we as Western society talk about generations, the more I feel like it helps to drive division and separation. Yeah. And there almost seems to be a constant defense, deference, and elevation of one over the other, rather than what's the season of time and what's the value that can be brought here. Right. And if you can't, of course you need, you can't fake experience. Yeah. You can't fake those years. And when you're young, it's so hard to understand that. Right. It is not a character defect to say, okay, boomer. That's what everybody has done. Right. Everybody has done that. When you get older is when you start realizing, and I think at 40 and 38 or whatever you are, 38, 39? You got to think about it? 39.
This is the big year.
That you got to think about it and go, oh, no. Like, we went to Tallahassee this past weekend for the New Rules Conference. Shout out to the New Rules Conference.
Had an incredible time.
Yeah,
fabulous
really
weekend.
did. I'd never been, and Pastor Adrian and Engage, they are incredibly hospitable and do fun. They do fun incredibly well. It's weird to say about a church like, what's one of their biggest strengths is they know how to party.
but yes, that is a true statement when you're talking.
It's not like we were at the New Rules Conference, like, do you want a Bible or Jello shots? It's not that kind of party.
That kind of party.
No, but they do a really great job with that. But we lived in Tallahassee for 12 years. I moved up there in 1997 to go to Florida State, graduated in 4 years, stayed up there an additional 8 years. So 12 years. And I was driving North Monroe Saturday morning. We were going to get Brugger's Bagels because there is no good bagel place anywhere here around here. How are there this many New Yorkers
in Tampa?
In the Tampa Bay area, and we have no bagel places.
Somebody's going to have a suggestion now. They're going to be like, yes, but have you tried? So be ready for that.
Don't tell me Panera, and don't tell me Dunkin' Donuts.
Or Einstein.
No, not Einstein.
Don't.
Hey, genius, Einstein. That's not that close. Where's the close one?
There isn't one close for us.
Thank you.
Anyways.
Yeah, where's Ricky and Bethany?
Need to learn how to make bagels and
coffee.
And
open up their shop wherever
Anyways, I totally pulled you off track there.
Ricky. But I was driving down these roads and going, I drove these roads every day for 12 years. Mm-hmm. And that seems like an echo of a life ago. Mm-hmm. And I still lived in Tallahassee longer than we've been back here.
Right.
And because at this point it's like, you start doing the math of everything and you go, well, Kelly and I have been together. More of our life has been together than more of our life has been apart. Mm-hmm. So this just kind of becomes the norm of it. And so you started thinking like, oh man, like, yeah, I just can't remember a time before TNLC. And it feels like this echo. And so you get to these almost nostalgic periods where you go, oh, I've acquired these seasons of life. And then, so you get to that point, you go, oh, that means that there's seasons of life that I haven't gotten to yet. Mm. And I wonder what I can pull and learn from those people before I get to it. It's going to be, it's hard to be like old when you're young, but if you can start pulling and applying some of the wisdom that you do that. And again, I think him being able to bring that encouragement to our older generations, and as a reminder again to the older generations that, the story that he told of the guy, Elisha tapping the water, the axe head rises, and he tells the young prophet, reach in, that he wanted him to participate in the miracle, that it doesn't have to be always one or the other, but it can be the side by side. That's one good. Might run a little faster, but one's gonna run a little wiser. And it's just another story. Sorry about the wisdom. I had a friend who played football at Florida State University. He was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks, and he was telling Adrian about what it's like on the team. And he goes, "Man, I am faster and more athletic than all of these veterans," because he was 22 years old. He was in his prime. Not even in his prime. I mean, like, he's as raw athletically as you can get. He goes, but they get to everywhere faster than I do because they know where to go.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
He's like, he goes, by the time I've thought and processed, he goes, I've run a couple extra steps and I've had to circle around, and they just go to the right place. They just know. They've seen this pass so many times. They've seen this place so many times.
Experience.
We're going here.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I mean, that's Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, but so that I think that kind of perspective shift and permission, and that was a great encouragement of our older generations on Sunday mornings.
So I'm going to ask a question for you. Whether you were here on Sunday morning, whether you listened to the podcast sermon recap or the sermon with Pastor Jim, whether you were here on Sunday night, every single person who heard Pastor Jim speak over the weekend received an encouragement of some kind, whether it was a personal encouragement or whether it was his message on Sunday. That message was for every single person who has listened to that message. So how do you process through these words from the Lord, these timely encouragements that we were given? We talk about this a lot. We talk about when we have these moments of encouragement, we say go back and test them. But can you give some practicality to how maybe you've processed through past words you've been given or those types of things? Because I know that a lot of people are going, okay, this sounded great. I see this, but what do I do now? Do I quit?
Specifically about the message, or like Sunday night when we were given
both,
words of
because
encouragement?
I think that there was a lot in the Sunday morning sermon that people are going to feel was applicable to them, but not look at that. And this is where the difference is of a prophetic voice preaching. It was very prophetic. It was a word for people. And then Sunday night, he was able to give specific encouragements to specific people.
Right.
So I think that I think everybody who has listened could take some application from these messages. But one things we talk about, and we don't always talk about actually how to do this, is people go, this sounded great. So do I need to quit so that the people 10 years younger than me can now come into job? Like, what do we do with these things?
Maybe. And that's the thing. I think the biggest thing is, now it's always hard for me to take notes when I'm preaching, because I'm preaching. I think generally. Mason may do the best job of this, of really taking notes, writing down what he's hearing. And I think when you're listening to a message or listening to like Pastor Jim in these moments, I knew we were recording it, but when I was Sunday morning, I'm writing down things, and I'm writing down not just the points that he's saying, but I'm writing the things that stand out to me.
Right.
Because I'm going, okay, immediately, what is resonating? What is being confirmed or being illuminated in my own spirit, soul, and mind? What am I going? Yeah, I know. Okay, there it is. I was waiting for somebody to say that, and there he says it.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing that you're paying attention to in those moments. And you always want to, technology makes it so much easier these days, but you always want to record it if you can. So the first thing is, what was resonating? What were you hearing in your spirit while you were listening to it? What part of that message was dense. That was fudge, not cake.
Right.
So there was a lot. So some people might come around and be like, man, when he was talking about you've got to embrace the Holy Spirit in a totally different way, that may not have been something that anybody else, when you go, what was the biggest thing that stood out to you from the message? There could have, in 8 different people, 10 different people, there could have been 8 different answers, 10 different answers.
Yeah.
But why did that stand out to you? Now, that's also the reason why we start we should be starting our discipleship groups with the question, what stood out most to you from the message and why? That's not an icebreaker question. That's asking, what was the Holy Spirit doing in you? What were you identifying with? What was challenging you? Why did, this part about sowing out of season. Why did that stand out to you? Man, I feel like God has been telling me that I need to step into this, but it seems like the wrong time to do that.
Right.
And somebody's going, oh, well, no, to me it was the part about, making sure that I'm not thinking that I'm too old to make a difference. Well, why? Well, I just went for my annual physical and
Feeling older. And
I don't know what God has left for me and if I have any value or what.
Right.
So there was a lot. So what resonated with you? Why did that? And then start asking, why did that resonate? Well, because it confirmed what I'd already been wrestling through and didn't know if it was supposed to be doing.
Right.
Or it was, why did that immediately come to mind and come to heart? I think even when you're receiving a personal prophetic word, that's the same thing. There's times where he can say, I think this specifically, somebody was, there was a couple people, like one person had a word specifically about their sleep. Well, that you can just go, I'm not having any trouble sleeping. Or, oh my gosh, I am having troubles. To me, there's a bigger resonance right there. But in the more general things, you got to go, well, what was I feeling in that moment? And I think you try to write those things down when you have as soon as the moment's over. But then when you listen to it, I think it's even helpful to listen to it again, because you're going to go,
I didn't hear that the first time.
I didn't hear that. That's not what I thought he said.
Yeah.
Now, does that negate what you already heard? I don't think so.
No, not at all.
So I would listen to it again, and then I would actually go through and manuscript it out.
Yeah.
Because I think then when you do that, one, you're having to listen to it quite a few times to be able to do that. But I think you hear things differently. You see things differently when you're reading them.
Yeah.
So now you're processing and going, what parts do I immediately understand and immediately make sense to me? You're having an issue with this family member. Do you know what family member this is? Yes.
Okay.
Fantastic. Great.
Awesome.
Then you don't have to really pray much about discerning that and moving through it. Other times, you might have to be kind of praying and meditating and going, okay, I'm not really sure what this is. Or sometimes this can happen where you immediately go, that's just, no, that may not be for me. Because again, as great as Pastor Jim is, he's still a man. He's still human. So as much as he can work to hear from God, receive from God, and speak on God's behalf as clearly, he's not trying to build himself up. He's not trying to get an ego. He's not going, tell me how great I was, or, hey, my prophecy percentage has moved from, when you drive sometimes and you see the seatbelt percentage last month.
No,
record. You ever seen these signs? Oh, and they say how many people wore their seatbelt, but what their record is for how many people in this city wore the seatbelt. And I'm like, this is the most arbitrary and insane.
I've never seen that.
How do you count, thing that you might be doing like that? Hey, my prophecy percentage accuracy went up from 92 to 94%. So my honorarium's going to move up in accordance with, things like that. That's not what he's looking for. He's still going to be a person who sees through a glass darkly.
Right.
And so that's why you always are going to pray and judge and go, what did I think this meant? Some things you might go, that's just not me. And that's okay.
Right.
Other things you might go, I'm not really sure what this means. And maybe that just leads to prayerful meditation. And it might be something where something happens 6, 9, 12 months, 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
30 days, and you go,
Oh, yeah.
you know what this is?
Yeah.
Okay, now this is all kind
Yeah.
of coming together. But I think that's the way I would always process through it. What's happening to me right
really
then
good.
in the moment?
Right.
What then did I hear the next time I listened to it? What do I need to, can I
Right.
write it down and
Yeah.
think through it even more? What do I need to reject? What do I need to prayerfully meditate on
Mm-hmm.
and just be aware of? And I think if you have people around you, it's always helpful to be like,
What did you hear?
yeah, what did you hear?
Yeah.
I heard this. What did you hear?
Yeah.
And sometimes people can hear other people's words and go, I know exactly all these things. I've had this happen before where people are like, I didn't really understand what he meant for this or that. Did you get it? I was like, yes, what are you talking about?
He was speaking
this,
directly
and
to
this.
this thing. You're like,
yes.
oh, I guess I can
And so
see
they're
that
like,
now.
oh yeah. And I was like, oh my, how do I
How
know
did
your
you
life
miss
better
that?
than you do?
Yeah.
But so that would be how,
That's really helpful. I think that's
even into our staff time where he was just
Mhm.
sharing on like strategies they've been through or growth things they've been through. I was like,
so
stuff
yeah.
is resonating.
Right. There was I talked about this a little bit with you a little bit yesterday. Just like there were several moments that he was just being very prophetic and probably didn't even realize how prophetic he was being with some of the questions and answers that he was talking with our staff about. But then again, I think that's why maybe you were in the service on Sunday and you were like, oh, I was distracted. I didn't hear this or I didn't get this. Like my encouragement would be go back and re-listen to Pastor Jim's message for the second time because it is something where you can get a lot of revelation. And I know for me, the second pass through always is like, oh, I missed that. I didn't hear that the first time. That tends to be the same process and those types of things. I think that's very applicable. I think that's
Right.
a very helpful way for any time you get any kind of timely encouragement to be able to go, hey, this is the way that I need to process through this. So I just thought that was really helpful. Anything else from Sunday or Sunday night that you wanted to touch on today?
No, I mean, again, I don't know that you would be listening to this and not already feel comfortable reaching out. But if the idea of like a prophetic ministry, what's happening here? I thought that passed away, or how does this really work? Why is this going on? That's the kind of thing that you should be asking questions about.
Yes, please.
You should be learning. You should be pressing in into asking questions about orthodoxy and orthopraxy, the way not only what we believe, but how it gets worked out. You should be asking those questions. No, I mean, I think that would be the biggest thing is making sure that you're asking those questions. And, if, again, we're always going to err on the side of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to try to err on the side of blessing. We're going to try to err on the side of believing God. We're going to try to err on the side of expecting God to do amazing and great things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly how, we're like, what if, like, we just can't let fear navigate. And it might not have been your church experience. It wasn't my church experience growing up because I didn't have a church experience growing up. And so I would just keep asking questions. What does this mean? And be going through kind of that thinking process.
Yeah.
Don't just be waiting.
Yeah.
Waiting almost like even when we said like, earlier, I was like, but you just said to wait through the words that you get. I was like, no, you pray and you meditate on them.
Yeah.
That's different than like, I'm going to think nothing about this. I'm going to ask nothing about this. And I'm just going to expect understanding to poof into my brain. I don't think that's
right.
helpful at all.
Right. I agree. I think that if you listen to Pastor Jim on Sunday, if you're listening to this podcast now and you still have questions or you're still wanting some clarity on something, that's what podcast at trinitynewlife.com or your discipleship group leaders are for. Like, ask those questions, get the clarity there. I thought it was an incredibly encouraging weekend, and I hope that our people felt that. I hope that you walked away from it going, oh, this may for personally for me and church-wide and big church-wide, I felt like it was a very timely message, and I think that we're going to see, even as Pastor Jim had started the message just talking about culture and the shift that's happening in culture and the oddities and things happening, just very much being out of season was a great reminder of like, oh yeah, all this stuff is kind of going on. So
yeah.
Other than that,
no, that's it. Again, like Chell said, podcast at Trinity New Life, Instagram, Trinity New Life as well. And we're going to be back later on next week with a recap Beyond Sunday, to Beyond Sunday.
We start a new sermon series on this
series.
series.
It's called 167.
Do
it's not
not
called Beyond Sunday.
miss this sermon series. It's going to kick off strongly, and it's going to be a great foundation for your discipleship groups as we're really talking about the applications of what happens during your week outside the 1 hour that you happen to be in church. So
All right. See you guys later.
have a good one. Bye.